Out here on the edge of the Norse Peak fire, which burned in 2017. You can see the burn trees in the foreground.
At the time, it was the largest Westside fire that had occurred in many decades, actually. So it was kind of a rare opportunity for us as researchers to go out there and ask some questions that have just remained unknowns just because fire is so rare on the west side.
Fires, the big fires that tend to shape western Washington, tend to be infrequent, meaning that it could span centuries between these big events, but they tend to be intense, meaning you end up with large patches of stand replacing fire. It's a natural part of the system. There's no reason why we wouldn't expect for that to occur in the future. And the way these forests burn, because they experience fire so infrequently, is very different than the way, say, the dry forests in eastern Washington would naturally burn, where those fires would be burning with lower intensity, thinning out the small trees, leaving the big ones.
I think one of our reactions when we see these really big burn scars, these fresh ones from 2020 on the west side, is it looks really visually impactful to us, and it'll never be the same. But again, all evidence is that fires just like this have burned for millennia, and all the old growth forests that are on the landscape now all originated in burn scars that look just like these ones. And so we have every reason to expect that these forests will bounce back and look like forests again in the future, even though they look so devastating initially. All evidence we have is that the west side fire regime is just a totally different animal, and that the narratives we typically carry for the east side, where fire suppression has caused a fuel buildup, climate change has dried out forests a lot, and those have combined to create this kind of perfect storm of increasing fire hazard and fire activity every year. On the west side, the story is really different, and in some ways it's more complex, but in some ways it's simpler. Because we know that for millennia, the forests on the west side have been burning in giant, severe fires in the hundreds of thousands of acres, if not more, as far back as the records go. The tree rings tell us that. And so when a year like 2020 happens on the west side, we can't necessarily point to a novel condition that's creating fires that didn't occur without human impact before. That it's not necessarily a symptom of fuel buildup because of forest mismanagement, because fires burned like this in the past, so before forests were being managed by Euro-Americans, and also these forests are some of naturally the most dense forests on the planet. They're always fuel rich and can always carry fire. And second, the climate change factor, it is very clear in the dry forests on the east side that climate change is driving a lot of fire activity. On the west side, it's less clear because, again, these fires occurred in the distant past, long before human-caused climate change. And the recipe for west side fires is a little more nuanced. We have to have a certain combination of conditions coincide. We have to have a late summer drought, we have to have an ignition source, and we have to have usually a major synoptic east wind event, which is what happened in 2020, especially in Oregon. So we can say that climate change is probably loading the dice a bit in that equation by tending to give us longer, drier summers. Even on the west side, we're seeing that. But it's only increasing that one factor in a sort of three-part equation.
For those smaller events, there's the fire-wise community principles of hardening the infrastructure around your house. DNR has a great group of people that can really help homeowners assess their houses to try to figure out what to do. Some common strategies include cleaning your gutters, making sure maybe changing the material of your roof from shingles to something composite or metal. But one of the most important things to do, like for any of these big natural disturbances, is thinking about your escape routes, how you can get away when a fire occurs. And that's probably as important, if not as anything else that we can think of for a lot of the west side. And probably it also means working closely with emergency responders, right, to kind of get this on their radars if it doesn't already exist. And it's probably not too different than maybe other disasters they think about, right? Because they're already planning for floods and tsunamis, volcanoes, you can go down the list. It's just kind of adding this to the mindset and probably pulling tactics that they're already considering for those other disturbances, but thinking about it in a fire context. Dan and I have commented that this summer, the 2020 fires are often included the word unprecedented. And in our minds, it's not the fires that are unprecedented, it's the people living in these landscapes.
Fires were very much not unprecedented from a long historical scale. They were only unprecedented from the relatively short Euro-American time settlement here. And the fact that now there's towns and homes in the way. Events are so infrequent just by nature. Just the nature of the fire regime. Fires are really rare over here. And so we might get a spate of them that occurs and it feels like they're increasing, but we don't know if that trend will continue or if there'll be a 50-year lull without fires. One of the implications of the Westside fire regime being so different and Westside forest being so different is that the toolkit we have to manage fire hazard in drier forests on the east side, it has more limitations on the west side. It has a role in some places, like the Puget Lowlands and other drier parts of the west side, but by and large, in huge swaths of the western Cascades, thinning to mitigate fire hazard probably would be ineffective, or we couldn't thin it enough or fast enough. Like we've been saying, the forests over here are just so naturally dense and fuel rich, and they're so productive that on the east side, where we can barely keep up with fuel treatments as it is, right, and those are slow growing forests. So you take that to the west side, and not only would it be hard to initiate that sort of thing, but then to keep up with a treatment need over time within these forests that grow biomass and fuel so quickly would be virtually impossible. In order to reduce fuels enough to actually influence fire spread on the west side, we would probably have to reduce the standing biomass and stem density to a point that the forest would be unrecognizable as anything we know from the west side. It would transform them into something sort of artificial. Humans are influencing fires on the west side of the mountains, but not in the same ways as we are on the east side. The major impact we're having on the west side is just ignitions. There's just ignitions everywhere on the west side now just because of human use, campfires and sparks from cars, cigarette butts, whatever it is. And in fact, I believe it's over 90% of west side fires are human ignited. So in some ways, that's the major management issue we need to deal with in terms of mitigating the risk of west side fires, is getting a handle on the ignition problem.